I'm Bryce Futch,
And I'm Tony Melton.
and this is The Way Forward.
Welcome to this episode of The Way Forward. Today's topic is war. We're going to be talking about what a possible future war with China would look like and what would bring it about and what would be the players involved and how that has to do with their current actions. We're also going to kind of look at that future possibility through the lens of the Russian-Ukraine conflict right now. Not only because Russia is a friend to China, but also that it'll set a unique precedent for how China relates to Taiwan, the South China Sea. So that's kind of what we're going to be covering today, and look forward to some good conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Bryce, tell us how this situation with Russia and Ukraine is significant for how we as Americans think about our future relationship with China. What does that have to do with it?
Sure. So a couple things for context. First, I don't claim to be any kind of expert on this. We've both just been reading a lot about how this works, how China views things. It's something that we've been studying, and so that's where this conversation is coming from. So please take all of that with a grain of salt. And in 6 weeks, when all this turns out to be absolutely false, please nobody hate us or sue us or so don't take it personally. But based off what we've been aggregating, this is kind of the context that we see and what makes sense. So Russia and Ukraine is really important. At the time of this recording, Russia has not invaded. They have continued to make some threats. They've continued to amass troops on the border. NATO is responding by sending troops to NATO countries along the border of Ukraine, but they're not sending any actual troops to Ukraine. The United States has basically said the same thing. We're going to send troops to the surrounding area, but we're not going to actually commit troops to Ukraine itself. We continue to send all different types of military aid, from weapons to supplies, but we're really not wanting to get in a shooting war with Russia over Ukraine. And the reason why this is important is because China is going to be watching how we respond to Russia's involvement. If Russia attacks Ukraine and the United States fails to respond in a timely manner, China will see that I think China will see that as a green light to start making moves on Taiwan, at least on some outlying islands within Taiwan.
Because Taiwan and Ukraine, correct me if I'm wrong, they're similar.
Yeah, we have similar relationships.
We're friends with them, but they're not a part of NATO.
Right. So they're
desirable by our two main adversaries.
Right. So Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Taiwan is not either. We have no formal military relationship with Ukraine. We do have some agreements with Taiwan that will continue to supply them with different supplies and missile systems.
Too.
Right, we are. But we don't have anything on paper anyway that says if you get attacked, we have to come to your defense. And which is why the White House has been hedging pretty much everything they've said to say we are going to defend NATO, we're going to defend NATO countries, we're going to defend NATO allies. What gets tricky with this is NATO is historically has said anybody who wants to join can join. But Ukraine has wanted to join for a while now, and NATO keeps pushing them off, and it's because of the pressure that Russia has been putting on NATO, because Russia doesn't want a NATO country on their border, which is interesting, and it kind of makes you question how far they're going to go within Ukraine, because if they do take Ukraine, they would have NATO countries on their border. But it also raises a question, too, because Turkey is a member of NATO, and Turkey is historically a bad actor. President Erdogan is no friend of the United States, no friend of freedom. But yet we are covering him by our nuclear shield because he is a member of NATO. So it begs a lot of questions. And then with Taiwan, while we are historically an ally of Taiwan, like we just said, there is no paper contract. And so it really makes it all much more muddy. The United States has been doing military activities and exercises within the South China Sea for a long time, trying to check China's power there. But they just continue to spread.
Yeah, speaking of muddy, the South China Sea is filled with
yes.
mud right now because China has been doing some nefarious stuff there.
Yeah.
How does this move into the South China Sea affect what's going on, and kind of how does that affect our relationship with China, situation in Taiwan?
Sure. So China wants to extend their hold over the South China Sea for a number of reasons, one of which is trade, and the other is defense. And so they've been building islands. So there's five. I think there's 5 man-made islands now. They started building in 2014 that hold everything from anti-aircraft batteries to radar installations. And their goal is to expand their coast by creating these man-made islands.
Did you get the muddy joke?
Yes, the muddy joke.
Okay, I just want to be clear that
yes.
that was a joke. Yeah.
The muddy joke. It was good. I appreciate it. It is classic dad humor.
Yes.
Yes, which I am coming to appreciate
That's
more
right.
and more.
You'll learn.
Yeah. Thank you. So they've been basically just dredging and then piling all this mud on top of these reefs to create these islands. So China's been doing this for a while. The United States has been trying to check their power there. Recently, there's been the creation of a group called the Quad. It's nicknamed the Quad, but it's 4 countries. It's India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. And their goal is it is informal. It exists to basically check China's power within the Indo-Pacific region. Australia has been under some influence attacks by China for a while. There was an arrest made in just the last few years of a Chinese businessman who was one of the biggest lobbyists in the country and had actually gotten several members of parliament elected. And he was turned out to be an agent, a registered agent of the Chinese government. India has seen China as a threat because India is the other hegemon in the region, and both of which, India and China, are nuclear powers. And India sees China as a rising threat. And so I would not be surprised if we did not see India making more of a defensive move on Taiwan's behalf than the United States does, especially if the United States fumbles this Russia-Ukraine deal, right? So I also think Japan would be willing to back up India as well. But Japan is also obviously threatened because China is right around the corner.
So just to zoom out a little bit, I see some parallels here. You've got Russia and you've got China. Both of them are making moves to the borders of the areas that they would like to possess.
Mm-hmm.
Russia now has 30,000 troops on the border of Ukraine.
Yes, in Belarus.
And so that's a move out to their border, on the border of where they'd like to go. And then China is building islands that are near Taiwan.
Yeah.
So that they can be closer and expand, take over that area. And okay, so that's one parallel. But then also you've got, in the Russia situation, you've got NATO.
Mm-hmm.
And we have more local allies that would be more poised to take a response if they so saw fit with Ukraine.
Right.
And we have the Quad.
Yeah.
That's kind of the parallel of NATO with the South China situation, in which India and Japan.
Yes.
I have an understanding of those.
Yeah. That's
interesting
exactly
that they're kind of parallel.
They are. They're very similar situations.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, if you look at the history of NATO and where it came from. So after the Second World War, the United States demilitarized, and a large number of European countries, in order to kind of check the Soviet bloc and to check their power, they created NATO, so the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And NATO existed because the United States had nuclear weapons, and Russia did not. But Russia had this million-man army that could wipe out Europe if it wanted to, and so the United States basically created this nuclear shield around NATO, and there hasn't been a huge shift in policy on how we use nuclear weapons since then. There's been some change from massive retaliation to proportional response and things like that. But at the end of it, what it comes down to is you have some kind of nuclear attack, and that's the concerning part about any kind of shooting war. So if the United States doesn't respond swiftly, I think there's kind of 3 responses we could see in Ukraine. One is nothing. They don't do anything. They let Ukraine fight it out. They have a swift response, or they have a slow and long response. Yeah, a swift response would be some kind of airstrikes to support Ukrainian ground troops, releasing those troops from NATO to go, or maybe even bringing in some kind of UN peacekeepers. But UN peacekeepers have a horrible record of doing anything constructive when it comes to actually protecting people on the ground using weapons. But having some kind of immediate response to check Russia's aggression immediately after they try and cross the border, I think that would be a wake-up call to Putin to say, hey, we're serious about this. We're not going to let this move forward. And I think he would seriously consider stopping and potentially going back. The long drag-out response would be some kind of NATO-backed airstrikes to support Ukraine over a drawn-out occupation. And China is going to be looking at which of those three we pick. And then I think they'll be saying this will be a very similar response and reaction to any kind of invasion of Taiwan, even if it's just an outlying island or two.
So we see Russia encroach upon Ukraine. We have, of course, I know there's three options.
Sure.
Let's just say two options. We do nothing or we do something.
Yeah.
To do something would obviously create a good buffer between Russia and NATO countries.
Yes. It
would also limit Russia's power as a superpower that's not super friendly towards us.
Right.
There's that advantage. It would upset Putin, which I think is an advantage in itself since he's a turd. But it's not technically our fight.
Yeah.
And on the that's a negative. We'd be getting involved. It would cost us money. And it would get us into a fight with Russia.
Yeah.
Officially. So what do you think is the right move there?
I think it's a strong support of Ukrainian background troops by airstrikes or missile strikes.
Do you think we should do something?
Yes,
but not and do something quick and emblematic.
Yeah,
right. Symbolic.
Yeah, so like
show of force.
Yes, so and even if the show of force, like I think the show of force needs to be meaningful, right? So if we look at the way we've done things like this in the past, so Syria is a great example. Under President Obama, he said there was this red line that we weren't going to let Syria cross if you use chemical weapons. Syria used chemical weapons. We didn't do anything about it. President Trump comes into office and says, "Here's a red line that we're not going to let Syria cross. If they use chemical weapons again, we're going to do something about it." Syria used them again, and so we used cruise missiles and we struck a number of Syrian bases. However, we basically told the Syrians beforehand, "Hey, these are the bases we're going to strike." Syria moved their people off those bases. We destroyed infrastructure, but we didn't kill Syrian militants, which I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but I understand why they did it. And I think in a response to Russia, we don't have that option, right? Like we can't say, "Hey, we're going to strike, these three military targets." Like it has to be meaningful. We have to actually kill Russian troops, which anytime you say anything like that, it's incredibly dangerous. And I don't say it lightly at all. Because it can easily, you made the comment earlier, it can easily go from a mortar to a cruise missile to a nuclear attack in a heartbeat. But nuclear weapons are so horrific that I really do believe that the people who have their finger on those triggers understand that, and they don't want to go there. But political pressure, things like that. The problem with it is the idea of using a tactical nuclear weapon, which is much smaller and can be used on a battlefield. I think that's where the temptation is going to be, to use these low yield nuclear weapons to try and turn the tide on the Russian side if the United States gets involved.
Right. So we just kind of laid out some pros and cons for engage or not, but there's actually another benefit to engaging in Ukraine. And that is that we're not just dealing with a single superpower here.
Right.
We're dealing with two superpowers.
Right.
Russia and China.
Yes.
And the decision to show force or not in Ukraine is highly linked with future Chinese action towards Taiwan.
It is.
And so it's just, the question is this the time to play strong in our relationships with the two superpowers or not?
Yeah.
And I think, from what I hear you saying, those two responses need to be very linked.
Yes, I think they do.
Not only do they have a tremendous amount of parallel, but our role in that situation should probably be linked at the same.
Yes, I would totally agree. I think I think the thing that ties us to Ukraine is our view on human rights, our view on international aggression, and we have a little bit of trade with Ukraine, but we would not be in a position to lose economically if Ukraine went to Russia. We're not. Like, just brass tacks of it. There's very little tangible things that we would lose or be affected by if that happened. Now, the way the United States stands on human rights, the way the United States stands on international aggression, we are 100% opposed to it, and it makes sense for us to be opposed to it. The difference with that in Taiwan is we would lose a lot if Taiwan was to fall. Taiwan I think produces close to 80% of the computer chips that we put in our cars. China produces the vast majority of the rest of them, which is one of the reasons why there's this shortage. We have a very heavy trade presence with Taiwan, and we would be hurting very, very heavily economically if Taiwan was to fall, or if their trade was just to be interrupted. Historically, China has not been a military threat. China is, and I don't think that they want to be a military threat term. I think they want to be an economic threat. If we look at the way they're developing their country, if we look at the way they're using the Belt and Road Initiative, they want to be able to pull the purse strings of every country around the world. And that's one of the reasons why they're buying up so much of the United States debt. They don't want to plant a Chinese flag in Washington, D.C. They just want to be able to put enough economic pressure on us to do whatever they need us to do.
Like restrict the production of trucks.
Right. Exactly.
See,
because everybody in the South is a pickup truck and a gun, and
right.
China wants to control the production
of all. We must
of all.
act.
Yes.
Else we won't have any more.
And I have shot a Chinese made SKS, and it is a horrible shooting weapon. It is really bad. But China has. So we talked earlier about the Quad. In a previous episode, we also talked about intellectual property and cybersecurity, and that's a big part of how China wants to move forward, right? So China is spending less on their national defense than we are because they're stealing things from us. So if you look at China's new fighter, it's basically a copy of the F-35, which we just spent billions of dollars developing. We just lost one, actually, in the South China Sea. It crashed on an aircraft carrier. It came in for a hard landing, bounced off, and landed in the water. The pilot ejected and was fine, but now it's a race between the Navy and the Chinese to pull this plane up off the floor because China wants to get in there and steal the rest of that technology that's on that plane. So we talk about another weapon that China stole was this anti-ship missile. So we spent these billions of dollars to create this new ship that is hard to track, hard to see, all of these types of stuff. And they spent a quarter of it by stealing missile technology from us to then develop this missile that can take out these ships. So we're in this price war with them, basically. So it's like what we did in the Cold War when we outspent Russia. But China is, instead of outspending us, they're like
outstealing.
Yeah, they're outstealing and outsaving. So like they spend way less than we do to create weapons that are almost as good. Now, have no illusions about it. If it was a totally conventional warfare, the United States still has the strongest military in the world, largest military in the world, best equipped military in the world, and it would be no contest. But it's not. That's where nuclear weapons come into play, and that nuclear deterrent really makes a big difference, which is one of the reasons why China is focusing so hard on that economic power. I think one of the things for us to keep in mind too, long term with the Belt and Road Initiative, is China is creating these military alliances. Well, they're creating alliances that could be used for military capacity down the road. So a few years ago, an article came out about how China and North Korea were training troops in different countries on the continent of Africa, and they're doing this training for them, but in doing so, they're also stationing troops there, right? So there's a number of Chinese troops that are now stationed around the Horn of Africa because they have a port there. I think the chances for proxy wars are going to go up because it's basically a reverse Vietnam, right? So China is the one sending advisors to these countries that countries that we have treaties with would be opposed to their aggression. So I think because of that Belt and Road Initiative, there's a higher chance for proxy wars, but I don't think that all-out war with China is anywhere on the spectrum in the next 50 years. I think it's going to be economic, it's going to be cyber based,
proxy.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's really good because I think, coming from I wasn't really informed about this until we started this season. I would have just thought of risk of war as, well, what do their troops look like? Mm-hmm. But to hear that war is a little more complex, at least puts risk in a different, you look at it a different way. All right, so here's a question for you. We were talking about mud. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about stones.
Sure.
Do you think that our government has the stones to do what is necessary? If this is a time to show symbolic force, to check these two superpowers, given that they're going to continue to expand, not just in terms of boots on the ground, but also cyber warfare, proxy wars, all the things you just named. Given our recent track record, the current administration, and even the past few, what do you think about our stuff?
I don't know. I think it's a very delicate balance, right? Yes, I think President Biden is very politically weak right now, and I think if his administration made up their mind to do it, and they were able to execute, I think it would be a game changer for them. I really do. But I don't think it seems like so far they don't have the ability to organize their way out of a wet paper bag. But if they did and they could pull it off, then.
So you see this as a big opportunity for them.
Yes.
But
chances of success are pretty low.
Slump. Right.
Yeah, I would almost, my concern would be that it would be something similar to when President Carter tried to rescue the Iran hostages and they lost, I think it was 4 or 5 helicopters in the desert. It was a total failure. I don't see it. I just don't see it working. I want it to work because I think it's best for us. I think it's best for Ukraine. But I don't think that they have the political will to make it.
It's not encouraging.
It's not.
So this is for the common man, right? Mm-hmm. Not the heads of state, this podcast.
Yeah.
So what are things that we should take away from this? What are things we can do? How does the common man relate to this topic, which is over the Atlantic and South China Sea? And what are some things to be watching for as we go through the next several weeks?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's a number of things. I think one, if you have the opportunity and can reach out to your congressman, your state rep, anybody that'll listen to you, encourage American involvement in these things. We have a stake. The question is, it goes back to the kind of the premise that we started with China, right? Like the United States is a great 2 to 4 year, 10 year strategic thinker. Like we do that really well. China is playing this 50-year, 100-year long game, and we do that very poorly. And so we're looking at you talked about this administration, and if we could do it, they're looking at the midterms, right? They're looking at the time between now and November,
right,
and saying what can we do to save our skin. And if they see this as a political benefit, then they may do it. But after the poor pullout in Afghanistan, I think the Biden administration is going to say, absolutely not. We're not getting into this again. We're going to stay out. So I think anytime you can encourage people to reach out to their state rep, reach out to your state rep it has a platform as well. Yes, it's not as directly connected as a member of Congress, but it is related. Speak out about it. I don't think we should limit our action to social media. I think that's a really bad way to live our life. I think Americans in particular have a poor view of activism because they like something or they share a link or they share a post and they think, okay, I did something. When in reality, the effect that has on people is pretty low. It's a part of the equation, but if that's all you're doing, it's not enough, right? So, but all that to say, don't not post on Facebook about it. Don't not share information about it. Make sure you're sharing it from a credible source. Find a respectable news agency and share what they're saying, because a lot of people don't know. A lot of people aren't keeping track of it. Right. They're not paying attention to it. I
never made this connection of what you just said, that we're not great at playing the long game, in part because we have short
election cycles.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost it's a the chicken and egg type of thing. We don't even have a populace that thinks long term because our politicians don't think long term. Because so I mean, the solution, it sounds to me, is once the populace is aware of these issues, can develop their own convictions about a long term strategy about these things, and believes in the value of having a consistent presence in other parts of the world. Well, then our politicians won't be so fixated on the here and now, the 2-year cycles. Yeah. That they'll know that we're behind them to do hard things, even when they're not immediately advantageous to them politically, because they have a wise, they represent a wise people.
Right. And I think, so this is I mean, we could do a whole other season on this, but this issue stems from a democratization of a democratic republic, right? So we were a democratic republic. Talked about this before. We're supposed to elect our electors, and we have said we have made the president this pseudo demigod. Like they can wield their political will, and they can cure cancer, or they can do whatever, or they can send somebody to the moon. But that's not the way the Constitution was meant to function. Right, we were meant to function with a weak executive, not a strong executive. And the Senate was supposed to be this moderating force because it was supposed to have equal representation amongst the states. And we've totally shot that all to pieces. The Congress was supposed to be the voice of the people, and we've done a good job of keeping that in check. But like it was a similar problem in Afghanistan, right? Like we went back and forth on every election cycle of whether we wanted to be there or not. And if you don't have any kind of consistent voice of saying, yes, we are committed, we didn't declare war. Why did we not declare war in Afghanistan? Right. So because we didn't, Congress was not tied to this decision, and it was a year-to-year case of, well, are we winning? Are we losing? Do we care if we're winning or losing this year? And we lost it. We should have said, "Welcome to the United States of America, territory of Afghanistan." Right. Like it takes generations to change minds from a tribal mindset and a nomadic mindset to one that understands Western philosophy of why democracy is important and why republics matter. Like we look at the American experiment, but we forget that it was in the context of this strong Judeo-Christian worldview paired with the Enlightenment and literally hundreds of years of human history, potentially thousands of years of human history, going all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, of here's how society should function. And we finally got it right, and now we think we can export it to another country in a matter of 20 years, and it just doesn't work that way. Right? You know, if we look at where the United States has fought wars in the past, we like to say that the only land we ask for is enough to bury our dead, which sounds great and very patriotic and very noble, but it's just not true, right? Like the reason we've continued to have peace in Europe is because we left troops stationed all throughout Europe under the guise of NATO. The reason we've had peace on the Korean Peninsula is because we've left thousands of troops stationed in South Korea since the end of the Korean conflict. Same in Japan. Like it's we don't do a good job of rightly representing how we do foreign policy militarily as conservatives and as Republicans, because we like to have this idea of we're not conquerors, and we're not. Yeah, we're not colonists, right? We're not colonizing. We're not doing any of that. But we are saying, hey,
I'm just saying, like we're so nervous of the accusation that we're not honest about how change actually does take place. Right. When you're trying to change the culture of a politic.
And a great example of this is India, right? So India was a colony of Britain. They pretty much all speak English because of that heritage. They have a functioning democracy because of the education that England brought to bear. There's a famous story. I don't know if we've told it in this podcast or not, but this British I believe it's a Hindu custom where the widow is burned alive on the same funeral pyre as her former husband, who's dead. So they burn that, they cremate the husband.
A romance.
Yes, it's insane. And so there was a British commander of some kind that came up on this ritual getting ready to happen, and he was going to stop it.
Yeah.
And this Indian said, "You don't understand. In our country, this is normal." And he said, "Well, you don't understand. In my country, we hang people who burn women alive."
There you go.
And they stopped that. They stopped that custom from happening. Now it still happens every once in a while, and it's not the cultural norm. It's not widely accepted throughout the country.
Yeah.
So there is a like, and people would say, well, if you're a moral relativist, you can say, well, if your society think this is fine, you can do it. But it's, I don't know how anybody in good conscience can say, if your society thinks that burning a woman alive is moral and just, that it is, because it's not.
Yeah. Right.
But so we
it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, and we take this idea of being very hands-off, being very laissez-faire with our international relations, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work because access is influence. This is really what it comes down to.
I'm really glad we talked. We ended this conversation this way because I think that, you can assess the situation in Russia. You can assess the situation in China purely on strategic grounds. But in the back of your mind, I don't know if this is aging me, but you're always going to have the what is it, South Park, the world police
yes.
thing like that. I feel like everyone is still kind of reacting against this fear of being too involved.
Yeah.
And really, I think what I'm hearing you say is that we as Americans should really own this role.
Yes.
But by God's grace, we are still a nation that especially relative to other superpowers, does represent justice and human rights and can insist upon a sane form of government.
Yeah.
One that aligns more closely with divine law than communism.
Yes. Right.
And so should be a little bit more aggressive, even when it doesn't serve our immediate self-interest.
Right.
Because long game, there's a bigger battle that's going.
Right. And I think the interesting kind of juxtaposition between Republicans and Democrats is, and I don't remember who said it, somebody else did, it's not original to me, but Republicans want a big army and they don't want to send it anywhere. And Democrats want a small army and they want to send it all over the place. And I think there's a middle ground between the two because it is it's both in our best interest and it is in the interest of human rights and human flourishing to intervene. It's Samantha Power, whether you like her or hate her, she was UN ambassador under President Obama. She wrote this book called The Problem from Hell, and it's incredible. It traces the history of the UN interventions in these human rights cases, and it's horrific, and it's a horrible failure. And it goes to show that you can't rely on large multinational bodies to act appropriately. At some time, somebody has to say, "I'm going to own this. We're gonna fix this."
Right.
Or we're going to do everything that we can to intervene from a objectively moral position. So, yeah.
Well, this has been a good treatment of that question. This was a longer episode, but you hung with us. Kudos, and I hope you were blessed by that. This was good. I learned a lot here too.
I'm Bryce Futch.
And I'm Tony Melton.
And you've been listening to The Way Forward.